Good morning. How's everyone doing today? I am happy to be joining you from the West Coast. So it's a little early, 6:30, but I've been up and running since 4. So this is the official kickoff to my day. It's always one of my favorite parts to spend time with my folks, my people, my tribe, the folks that I love. I got my King shirt rocking that today. So we are rocking and rolling, and hope everyone is doing awesome. Awesome, awesome. Hope everyone got their workouts in, depending on where you're coming from around the world. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So you folks are learning. Whoever comes first come, first serve. So we have, it looks like Ori got the first question in actually a couple minutes before we even started. So this is awesome, awesome, awesome. So, hey, Eric, excluding patching, what are the best KPIs, key performance indicators, to show in management meetings? So, I always going to answer your question with a question. So the question is, what are the biggest vulnerabilities and exposures in your organization that are not being addressed or fixed? I mean, that's really how you want to play the game. That's what I find is a lot of folks misuse KPIs because they do it in one of two ways. It's either a checking the box exercise, or they pick an extreme. So they either pick a KPI that everybody meets, or they pick a KPI that nobody can meet. And the problem with both of those is if everyone's meeting it, then what's the point? Because the whole idea of a KPI is not to pat people on the back, it's to change behavioral patterns. And if nobody's meeting it, then it's a bad KPI, because what do you think they're going to say in the meeting? It's too hard. So you want to get KPIs where you have somewhere around a 75, 80% compliance, right? You want to get the bar there. And then what you're doing is you're basically putting pressure on the rest of the organizations to basically fix and address those issues. So that's the answer more specifically, because I know you're looking for exact things. Phishing exercises, if you're not going in and doing some sort of checking of your employees, phishing exercises, things like that. Right now, it's not perfect, but that is one of the number one ways that organizations are being broken into and being compromised. And what I like about that one is it's something that a vice president or management can control, right? They can put pressure on their staff to be more careful. They can instruct their staff not to click on links, not to open attachments. They could request additional training. So it's things that are within their control that I tend to like the most. Like you said, going in, patching, configuration management, all that stuff. The problem with those KPIs is they're not often controlled by the actual department or vice president or manager. It's often controlled by IT or a third party. So it's great that you're going in and giving an organization a low or high KPI based on whether their servers are patched, but that's not something they directly control. So my favorite KPI these days are the phishing, who's clicking on links, who's opening attachments, user awareness training, who is up to date with their user awareness training, anything that's focusing on controlling, managing, and securing the endpoints are the KPIs that I like for the overall organization. Hello, I'm a fresh graduate. Congratulations. Awesome, awesome. I'm so thrilled. We need a lot more people in this space working there. So I'm a fresh graduate working as a cybersecurity analyst. I'm interested in higher education down the line, and was wondering how a PhD helped you in your career, and would you recommend it? Great question. So to me, unless you want to be a professor, right? If you want to be a professor, then a PhD is pretty much a requirement for the most part. But if that's not the career path you want, then to me, PhDs really are primarily, is it a personal goal of yours? Do you want to achieve that level? A PhD, being a doctor in an area like computer science, specifically cybersecurity, was always a goal of mine. It was a personal goal. It was something that I wanted to achieve. You'll see in a lot of things, I don't use it. Right? I tend to go by Eric Cole. There'll be sometimes presentations where I just introduce myself as Eric Cole on the title slide, and then it throws people because those that know me sometimes like to call me, "Hey, Dr. Cole," or Dr. E, or stuff like that. People like, What's going on? Are you a doctor?" Right? And they always want to think medical. So it's really primarily, if you're not going to become a professor at a college, it's primarily for you. So that's really the thing. If it's something that's a strong desire of yours and you want to achieve that, then you should. And the reason I push that is a PhD is hard. It, if you get a real program, right? So some of these out there, I just shake my head going, no. I mean, if you're going in and you're taking 2 classes and you're writing a 3-page paper and you're done in 3 months, that's not a PhD, right? If you go to a real accredited true blue program, I mean, you're talking, it's another master's in terms of classes, which is fun. But where most people get started is the ABD, the all but dissertation, because the dissertation essentially, you have to go deep into an area and invent something nobody else has invented. That's essentially what a true PhD is, which is going to be 3 to 5 years of your time. And you could be working in an area for 2 years. And then if somebody else publishes papers on that, you basically start over. So it's one that you really have to me, that personal commitment and drive to be able to do that. Now, has it helped me? Yes, because I found areas where it's beneficial. For my traditional cybersecurity work, if you want to be a world-class cybersecurity engineer, a analyst, a chief scientist, that type of position, yeah, it might help a little bit. A CISO, it's not going to hurt you, but you don't really need it. Where to me, the PhD really helps out a lot is in one of our business lines with expert witness. Because expert witness, where you testify in high profile trials, patent infringement, data breaches, things like that, it's typically college professors that have deep knowledge. So most law firms want to hire a doctor, a PhD, in order to be able to perform expert witness work. So that's one where I have a unique differentiator because I have the PhD, but I'm not a college professor and I have extensive work experience. That makes me a little bit of a unicorn because I have the credentials, but I also have industry experience, which very few, if any, college professors really have. So I've carved out some niches where it did help me and advance. So I'm a big fan. I would definitely do it again. I highly recommend in pushing education. Most of us limit ourselves and put throttles on our ability. So I would definitely encourage you to do it. But ultimately, if you are not committed and really want it, it's going to be a long, hard journey. And that's why many people tap out at ABD, all but dissertation. Hi, Eric. All right, I love this. We got King Thomas. Look at this. Look at this, King Thomas. We got King Eric, right? We got the Kings going today. I love it. I love it. Hey, Eric, how is your morning? It's going good. I've been up since 4. I already hit the gym. I already did my meditation. I already did my journaling, and it's only 6:30 a.m. right, or 6:40 a.m. now, I guess. So I'm rocking and rolling. And believe it or not, I haven't even had my caffeine yet. I just realized I forgot to have my pre-morning workout, which actually might be a good thing today, right? I don't know why I'm feeling good. I'm feeling energized. We probably can skip that. So I recently found your channel and find your content very informative. I've taken some of your advice and started talking with my CISO on a biweekly basis. Awesome, awesome, awesome. He has stressed the importance of GRC and ensuring programs are secure. I have a few questions. Could you speak on how GRC is important and how a CISO should be interacting with it on a daily basis? It's one of those where it's a piece, right? So that your governance, your regulation, your compliance, that's all important. I'm guessing you're in a highly regulated industry. That if your CISO came back and basically stressed the importance of that, I'm guessing you're in a highly regulated industry where that, yes, is going to drive a lot of it. But here's the thing to always remember: you can be compliant but not secure, but you can be secure and compliant. So where you want to be careful, where this road gets a little dangerous, is organizations are so focused on the compliance and the regulation that it's just do this, do this, do this, do this, do that, and they're checking boxes. And yes, at the end of a period of time, you're compliant, but there was no plan. There was no integration. There was no standard operating procedures, things like that. So you're not necessarily secure. Go and look at all the. This is one of my favorite data points. Look at all the major breaches that have occurred. What do they all have in common? They were all compliant with regulation. Look at every credit card breach. At the time of the breach, according to the company, they were compliant with PCI. Right. That's sort of the example there. So what I like to use regulation and compliance is it's a really good stick to get people to do things and to get your budget. Because if you go to a board or you go to the chief legal counsel and you say, hey, I want to do this because it's a vulnerability, 80% chance of occurring, and maybe it occurs, maybe it doesn't. But if you go, if we don't do this, there's a 100% chance we're not compliant and we can get fined a certain amount of money. Right? That's going to drive it pretty well. So that's really where you want to go in and utilize the compliance more as a strategic tool to be able to get the resources, get people on board, and get them to perform the security that you want, because it's not negotiable, right? It's not an opinion of yours. It's something that has to be done and put in place. So focusing in on that is good. I would just warn you, that's not true for all industries, right? There's some areas that are not highly regulated where the GRC is a small piece, but it's not the primary driver behind security. So you just want to recognize that you're sort of in that unique, highly regulated environment. And that if that's where you continue to work, that's not a bad area to focus on. Could you also speak to how to ensure security gets implemented in projects? Uh, sort of software development lifecycle and security, more guidelines and checkpoints. I'll give a high level answer and then I'll give a little more detail. Be cooperative and be an asset, not a liability. What I mean by that is the reason why organizations start projects, implement projects, and roll out projects without involving security is because they view you as being difficult, as putting up roadblocks and making their job harder to do that. Just a fundamental principle. Why, when they start a project, do they always involve project management? Because PMs make their life easier. If you go in and you try to start a new project without a PM, it's a nightmare. You have to do the work, your schedules, your budgets, all those things get off track. So they've learned very, very quickly that it is important to have a PM involved. So they're going to have PM involved right out of the gate. If you need servers, if you need technology, if you need those types of resources, you need IT. So they're going to involve IT in doing that. If you're rolling out a new project, you need money. You want to make sure you have the money and resources. So you're going to involve finance in those. The problem is they don't see the value or the positive of cyber. So when they go in and I talk to a lot of entities, not true in all organizations, but in a lot of organizations, when I say, why didn't you involve security from the beginning? It's essentially, why would I? What value do they add? Right. And they tend to disrupt the process and make it harder and more difficult. So the trick, and this is what I do when I was CISO, vCISO, and I train up CISOs today, is you want to provide so much value to the project that it's a no-brainer to involve you. That every business unit, when they start a new project, go, wait a second. When security is involved, it goes better, smoother, and quicker than when they're not involved. I tell all of my security engineers, when you get put on a project for another department to roll out a new system, service, or solution, I'm going to hold you accountable to making sure that project gets done on time and under budget. They're like, Eric, that has nothing to do with me. That's everything to do with you. If you're on the project team, your focus should not be on, do we make it secure? Now, stay with me because some of you are going to shake your head on this one. The focus should not be on is it secure? The focus should be on do we deliver a high quality product within budget and on schedule to our customers? Now, that means it's secure. But notice the difference. If you're only focused on making it secure, you don't care if you're disruptive. You don't care if you slow down the project. You don't care if you go in and say no, 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 and you don't present solutions because all you care about is, hey, I told them. How many times do you hear security people go, I told them not to do it, but they did it anyway? I don't tolerate that. If a security engineer ever tells me that, I go, why don't you come up with a solution? Well, why didn't you give them an acceptable solution that was better than what they were currently doing? So it's this mindset shift that we really need to make in security of we need to be supportive. If our focus, if your engineer's focus is our goal of being on this team is to make this project so successful, over deliver to the customer under budget and on schedule, then when you find security issues or problems, you're going to come up with solutions that are good for the business and good for security. But that's different of how many people look at it. To me, we're sort of in this time that I sort of nickname, and the name is catching on, of security is more about yes than no. If you go back 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, security was very much about, nope, you can't do that. Here's a vulnerability. Well, there's and just, I remember when I was at the agency, there was somebody who was highly successful in security, and me and him didn't get along because he just sat there in meetings with this little smirk on his face, and it was like, that's a vulnerability, that's a weakness, that's going to be compromised, that could lead to buffer overflow. And in every meeting, he would just sit there and tell you what's wrong, how your baby is ugly, basically. And then the reason why we didn't get along is people would say, but okay, how do you fix it? And he would go, not my problem. That's your problem. I'm just here to point out the vulnerabilities. And I'm like, no, you're not. And the funny thing is, fast forward to today, he is not very successful and I am, right? So the mentality tends to work, but you want to be somebody who's looking to solve the problem and give a solution and complete the project and not a roadblock. So that's really the big advice is it's a huge paradigm shift and it's something we could talk about for hours, but that's really the reason why you don't get involved in projects because you're viewed as an obstacle, not an asset. My good friend Vic, always Buenos Dias, checking in from Atlanta. All right, I always get thrown off because I see the Buenos Dias and I was expecting South America, and then you always pop in from Atlanta. So awesome, awesome, awesome there. My man Zach is in the house. Good morning. Do you think the CIA triad is still relevant, or should it be updated to include other areas like privacy or safety? I still think it's relevant, but what you have to remember is that the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability are basically the foundational components of security. So you want to make sure that your data is not inadvertently disclosed, inadvertently altered, and available when and where people need it. That they're basically your fundamental building blocks that you're using. Now, you can put those together and create areas of privacy, safety, and others, but to me, they're still based over that. Like privacy is really just a combination of availability and confidentiality. So, what you're basically saying with privacy is that the data is properly protected, but it's available only to those who need it. So, you're basically putting two building blocks together because the challenge with confidentiality by itself is if all you do is focus on that, prevent, detect, deter the unauthorized disclosure of information, it's simple. Make information unavailable to everyone. I've achieved confidentiality. The problem is we failed on availability, right? So to me, privacy is really that balancing act of only you should have access to your data when and where you need it, and no one else should. If you look at safety, safety is really a combination of your integrity and your availability. Right? To me, safety is the information is accurate and correct. Right? So it's safe for those using it, but the systems are available and operating in that secure manner. So it's really just a combination of it. So to me, I still think that CIA is very relevant. It's just we have combinations of them together that are creating these new areas. So the way I will answer it is I think the old approach of isolated silos of CIA is outdated. So I don't use a lot of slides these days because I find people look at the slides and not paying attention. So I don't use as many slides. But when I do, my new slide is instead of having CIA as these independent silos, you know how you see the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability, and they're separate, isolated. I actually basically do them as sort of clouds merged together. So they're not independent, isolated areas. They basically all need to work together. And I would argue today, any organization that is going to achieve an appropriate level of security has to be doing all three. You can't just focus on one of those. So yeah, they're relevant, but honestly, do what works for you. Right? If in your organization talking about privacy and safety is better than talking about CIA, then there's no hard and fast rule, but just in sort of how my mind works and around it, it's still the core base building blocks. We're just combining and merging all the pieces together. What do you say to a CISO who wants to spend their team's time just blindly working on security framework progress just to show execs projects and never tie it back to any risk? Now, I have to put some caveats. Are you saying, what do you say to a CISO that's doing this that you work for and you want to keep your job? Or are you just saying in general? So to me, if I was brought in as a consultant, and to me, those of you that have worked with me know that you either love me or you hate me because I'm there to do a job. And if you don't like the job I'm doing, I'm okay if we decide to part ways. So I'm not going to go in and tell you what you want to hear. And I'm not going to go in and be forced to back something I don't agree with. Like I said, some people like that, some people hate that. So if you're asking me in that situation, I would basically tell that CISO that you are missing the target. You're basically getting experience, but at some point when a breach happens, which it will because you're ignoring the fundamentals of risk, you're going to get fired. But because you have the credentials of a CISO and the executive board likes you, you will easily be able to get another job, probably at a slightly larger company, and probably making more money than you were. So that's the problem today, where it sounds like this CISO is more about their own career advancement and basically setting themselves up for the next job as opposed to going in and really doing what's right for the company. Because frameworks are frameworks, but if it's not prioritized and it's not focused back to the risks to the organization, and going back to my favorite for what can happen, likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, and cost to fix it, right? That's really your obsession as a CISO, not a framework, then it's not really working. If you work for this person, then you need to be a little nicer. And I would say, hey, the framework is good, but what if we focus in on prioritizing the framework based on risks to the organization? Now, the problem you're going to run into is based on what you're telling me, this CISO doesn't care about risk. They want to fix the quickest, easiest items, as many as they possibly can. So what you're going to run across is their criteria is what is easy and simple so we can check as many boxes. And your criteria is on true risk. So what you need to do, which is not the simplest, but it could sort of be done, is you need to go in, figure out what the highest risk to the organizations are, and then identify what are the quickest, simplest things that can be done to minimize or reduce those risks, and then propose those risks. So now you are focusing on what's important to the company, but you're fitting it within that mindset of that current CISO that's in place. But this could also be an example where it might not be a good match, right? There are some bad CISOs out there. There are some amazing CISOs out there, and there's some bad CISOs. And this might just be an example where you have a bad CISO, so you have to decide where you want to do. What I would recommend to you is do what you can to support that CISO, but build up as many relationships as you can, because at some point the approach the CISO is taking is you're going to have a breach, and that CISO is going to be let go. So you want to position yourself so when that happens, you'll be able to potentially take over or become the CISO. Now, just so we're clear, because some people are like, Eric, that's pretty evil. No, no, no. I'm not saying you push the CISO under the bus, right? That would be a little mean and cruel if you're strategically setting them up. What I'm saying is the CISO's jumping in front of the bus. So you might as well go in and do what you can. So when that happens, you're the next person in line to take over the position. I don't think there's anything morally, ethically wrong with that approach. So just you sort of decide how you want to play those cards. Why do sites like PayScale and Glassdoor list average CISO salaries as 170K? In my mind, that's closer to what a senior security engineer should be making. Couple things. See, and you're comparing apples and oranges, but a senior security engineer at a top-notch organization should be making more than a CISO at a small to medium-sized organization. So what you're looking at here is averages. You're looking at sort of the law of averages there. So world-class CISOs can make a lot of money. And that's what I always tell people is don't become a CISO for the money. Because as a world-class security engineer, as a chief scientist, before I made the switch, in my career, when I was chief scientist and world-class security engineer, I was making pretty close to what the CISO at the organization were. We were both at a VP level. We were both at the same level in the organization and similar bonus structure. So it's one of those things, it's not a money factor at play. It's what do you love to do? Now, back to your question. The reason why you see it at 170 is two factors. One, large organizations don't use PayScale and Glassdoor to advertise, promote, or give out their information. If you're talking a Fortune 100 or Fortune 50 or even Fortune 500 company, they're not going to go in and post the position and the salary. They're going to use headhunters. They're going to use contacts, connections. That's why I've urged folks, if you listen to my podcast, if you want to be a CISO, be out there, be visible, sit on boards, present to boards, because a lot of times when companies are looking to become or get a new CISO, they're going to go to the board and say, do you know anybody? So a lot of the high-end, top-notch positions out there aren't going to go in and list it. So what you're seeing as the average is small to medium-sized CISOs. And remember, many of them today, they call it a CISO, but it really is a glorified security engineer. So it's not surprising that those salaries are pretty similar in terms of sort of that 170, 180. To me, that's a little low. Like a real, true CISO, you're talking base salary closer to 250, 300, maybe 350. Now, here's the thing to remember also. True CISOs True chiefs, a true chief at a company, whether it's a CEO, a COO, a CFO, or a CISO, a true chief makes most of their money on bonuses, not salary. Because a true chief is there to increase revenue and increase profitability. So it's not uncommon when you see these huge executives that, oh, they made $5 million last year. Yeah, their salary, their base salary is probably 300, 350. But because the company did so well, their bonus structure is much, much larger. So you can find exceptions to the rules, but you're not going to go in and see a CISO or even a CEO or others typically where their base salary is 8 or 900K. They're going to make 2 to 3 million. I know CISOs that make a couple of million, but it's all bonus based on how the company is successful and how the company is working. So yeah, I wouldn't pay close attention to that because that 170 is more glorified security engineers. It's more small to medium sized companies, and it's referring really to base salary. And it's not really taking into account the bonus structure that if you are a true CISO, a true chief, your bonus structure is really how you're going to get compensated. The salary is really just sort of a little token as because you have to give somebody a salary, but it's really all about the bonus that's really critical and important. How do you know the value of data? For example, if our ERP server providing services to everyone in the organization, and if that goes down, then what is the loss to the organization in terms of money? So, value of data. What would be the cost if it's not? So there's basically two things in here. What is the cost if it's not available, and what is the cost to replace it? So if you go in and you talk about the ERP providing services to the organization, if that system disappeared and you had to build it from scratch, how much money would you lose a day by not having that system available? And how much would it cost to rebuild and recreate that system? That's really what you're going down when you're talking about the cost of data. Now, the other factor, which goes back to what we talked about earlier, is you also could take into account lawsuits, regulations, fines, and others. So if you're talking a hotel where you have PII, personally identifiable information, and we wanted to look at the cost of the data, we would basically add in a third component. We would say, okay, what is the impact if it's not available? What is the impact to recreate it? And then what would be fines or lawsuits that you would have to pay if that information wasn't properly protected or secured? And it's really those three factors in play. And in a lot of cases, it's really the first and the last. Because if the data is not available, that's going to negatively impact the business. There's a cost. Recreating it in a lot of cases is just as people show up, you re-ask for the information. You just regather it. So that's not always a huge cost factor. But then, of course, the fines, regulation, lawsuit component is another one that you do want to take into play. So those are really the pieces and components that you're looking at. So what does a recruiter check in the CV for hiring a CISO? That's actually the wrong question. The real question is, what does a recruiter use to exclude your resume? This is the big misnomer that if you can get this piece, you're going to be in such a different place putting together your CV and applying. When a recruiter, a company, HR, or anyone else reviews resumes or CVs initially, we get a stack of CVs and we go through them. We're not looking at who would make the best CISO. I'm not going in and saying, oh, who meets all this great stuff. What I'm looking at is who should I exclude? I'm looking for things to exclude folks. So we limit who we have to interview. We're hiring all the time at my company. I do this process. I'm often brought in by clients to find a CISO, find a replacement. I work with HR, I work with them. That's exactly what happens. You get a stack of 100 CVs, and it's like, okay, you're scanning and looking for reasons to exclude them. Boom, boom, boom. So I'll answer that question because that's really the one that matters. When a recruiter is looking at a CV to exclude, the first and foremost is this a technical person pretending to be a CISO? If you have a section on your CV, technical skills, and you have a section where you list more than one or two certifications, so you list your 37 certifications, which are all technical, bye-bye. You're excluded because you're not a CISO. You want to be technical. If you're going in and you're applying to a CISO position, and the top part, and I see this all the time, the top part of your CV is your technical skills and certification. You're telling me that's what you love, that's what you're proud of, and that's what you enjoy doing, which means you're not going to be a good CISO because you're not ready to switch. You haven't let go of the technical side. That's your identity. The way you're presenting yourself in your CV is your identity, and you are still identifying and representing yourself as a technical world-class security engineer, and that is the most detrimental thing to being a CISO. So that is the first thing where you're going to get excluded very, very quickly. So remove technical skills. If you want to have one or two base certs, like a CISSP, that's sort of a debatable one, good or bad on it. So that one I would put under education and maybe one other, but you do not want to list all of your technical certs because that's not what they want for a CISO. So that's going to be the first and foremost reason why they're going to exclude you. The next big reason, if you don't have years next to your experience. We see this all the time where people go in and they'll list out these great titles like CISO, Vice President of Security, Information Security Officer, this and this, and there's no dates. So we're like, did you do it for a day, a week? That's usually the number one hide. If somebody excludes a date, it's because they haven't done the position very long, or they don't want you to know how long they've done it. So that's another one that you want to be careful of. The third one, that's a really quick exclude if there's gaps. If you're going in and saying from 2018 to 2022, you're at this company, and then from the next job is 2012 to 2014. And I'm like, well, what'd you do from 14 to 18? That's also an indicator that you're either leaving out, not excluding, or something happened there. So just cover the basis or cover the grounds for that in there. And then finally, make sure that when somebody looks at the CV, it screams strategy. It screams business. It screams revenue. It screams profit. It screams that you are a business leader that has experience in cybersecurity. If it screams you are a world-class security engineer that wants to get into business, or you are a technical expert that played around on the business front, you're going to get excluded. So those are really the big things on there, is because the rest of it is once you do the first interview. Remember, the sole purpose, the only reason you have a CV is to get the first interview. After that, your CV is irrelevant because then it's you. They're going to ask you, they're going to go through you. You can explain, you can go through things, you can talk about all the areas. So the sole and only purpose is to get through the initial screening. So you set up that first interview, which means your CV has to make sure you're not excluded and scream strategy and executive and doesn't scream technical and security engineer. Why using list of vulnerabilities as a metric is not a good one for CISO, especially when you show the CEO there were a lot of vulnerabilities that you have fixed, specifically the critical ones. Uh, Once again, metrics are good. So, to me, if you have no metrics and you're putting together some base metrics, that's better than nothing. The problem and the reason why I don't like vulnerability scanning is it's a moving target. There's always new vulnerabilities, there's always new exposures out there. And because you don't control those, you're basically presenting a negative metric to the execs. So, yes, it's great that you go in and you say that we fixed 5 vulnerabilities, or we fixed 10, or we fixed 12. But here's the problem. How do they really know you fixed the most critical ones? Now you're telling me that you're sort of tying it to risk, but how do they know that? How do they know you're just not going for the quick and easy? And the question is this: if you really are going for the ones that are the highest risk, then the amount of attacks and compromises should be decreasing. So why not use that metric? So the problem I have with vulnerability is you're basically going each month and saying, look at what we haven't done. Because in a real world, you should have fixed the vulnerability, right? Why is there a vulnerability in the first place, right? You should have patched the server when the patch came out. You should have had configuration management in place. So in a good, perfect world, a vulnerability is basically showing what you haven't done. Now, you can get away with it for a little period of time. And if it's the only metric you have, I'm okay with it, but it's not a very mature metric. It's a very basic starting off metric because you're presenting the negative of what you haven't done as opposed to the positive. And I'll tell you right now, and I see this all the time, when you present vulnerability data, somebody on the board is going to ask you, okay, you told us you fixed 30 vulnerabilities. How many vulnerabilities are not fixed? Well, 200. You mean to tell me there's 200 vulnerabilities? Why are you sitting here talking to us? Go fix them. Why didn't you fix the other 200? Right. So you see where this is going. You're basically taking something and you're trying to shine a very narrow light on only look here. Don't look at anything else. And really good board members don't buy that, and they're going to see right through it. So I see more and more and more today that vulnerability data is going to get you into trouble because you're trying to focus them on look at what we did do, and they're going to come back and say, well, what are the total vulnerabilities not fixed? And you're going to immediately get a big light on what you haven't been doing or haven't been focused on. And once again, remember, one person, one opinion, right? I'm telling you what works and doesn't work, and I'm telling you what I'm seeing. But ultimately, if you go, Eric, it's working, they understand it, we're getting the budgets, we're getting the approval, that's okay. I mean, keep doing it, but just recognize that it could be a little slippery slope that you're working with. Lastly, we got King Thomas again. What are some questions I could be asking my CISO to maximize my time in our chats? I'm assuming that you want to get promoted and you want to become a CISO. That's why you're here on this channel. So I would just go in and try to build a relationship. What else can I do to help you? What else can I do to support the organization? And here's where you want to be careful. You don't want to say, what do I need to know to become a CISO? Because that could be threatening to them. So what the question you want to ask is, what additional skills do I need to learn if I want to become your deputy? If I want to move up and become your deputy, and then when you get promoted, I want to become CISO, what additional skills do you think I need to learn? What additional skills do you think I need to focus energy and effort on? So those would sort of be my questions. The two focus on, once again, The best way to get what you want is to help other people get what they want. So my initial focus would be on how can I help you? And then the second area would be what additional skills do I need to be able to be more effective in this area? So at this point, we are at the end of our time together. We do about 45 minutes. I know a few questions just popped in. Remember, come early. Right, next week I'll be here. We start at 9:30 a.m. East Coast, but remember, the channel is open before then. So join at 9:25 and get your question in. You probably notice that people who get their questions in early tend to get a little more attention than at the end. So get those questions in early. I hope you have an amazing week. Make sure you listen to this week's episode of Life of a CISO. And remember, I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care what your bank account says. I don't care what your current title says. One thing you need to remember and keep telling yourself for the next 7 days, you are world class. You are world class. It's not you're going to be world class. You're currently world class. You just have to let everything else in your life catch up with that. Have an amazing week, and I'll talk to you next week.